Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Darshan Talks. I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. As you might know, I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA regulated products. So if you have an interest in an FDA regulated company or its products, this is the podcast for you. So today's podcast is about the future of pharmacists and the future of pharmacy, and how does that all tie into drug shortages, drug availability, cybersecurity, and much, much more. So if you are in the life sciences, if you are a pharmacist, if you are in medical affairs, this is probably the conversation you want to be listening to, because our guest today is a superstar. And I know she doesn't like thinking of herself that way, but more than one person I've spoken to has been like, I can't believe you're talking to Erin Fox. And she is the Senior Director of Drug Information and Support Services at the University of Utah Health, an adjunct associate professor at the University of Utah College of Pharmacy in Salt Lake City. Dr. Fox is an unpaid volunteer member of the advisory board for Civicrx. And for those of you who don't know what Civicrx is, it is a nonprofit drug company. And she's also a member of the AJHP editorial advisory board. The University of Utah Drug Information Services does have a contract with Vizient, but it's not a conflict because they have less than 5% of the total budget for UUDIS. Dr. Fox also serves on the AJHP editorial advisory board. So welcome, Dr. Fox.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is going to be really fun because I'm really curious, really interested in some of the things that are already going on. So let's start with the basics. A report came out from ASHP, and you were the author. You're one of the authors in it, and it talked about the future of pharmacy. And could you talk a little bit about your report, just for the people who haven't read it yet? And where do you see pharmacy going, and what are some of the concerns that we're going to have to deal with?
Yeah, so this report, we do it each year. It's based on a survey. So we get a group of very smart people together. We think of survey questions where we think, strategically we should be thinking of planning over the next 5 to 10 years. We ask thought leaders to answer our survey questions, and then we take a look at the results, and then we get to write about it. As an author for this report, it's really fun because you can sometimes disagree with the survey panelists and just riff, or sometimes they go along with how you think the question is.
And when you do the survey, is it more of you're talking to people, or is it more of I'm going to send it out to 20,000 people and some of them will respond and some of them won't?
So it's an email online survey by invitation. So ASHP surveys, their past leadership and other leaders. We get a pretty decent response rate. I don't have the exact numbers for this year, though.
Sure. Okay. So let me point out some of the things that the survey brought out that I thought was fascinating. So let's start with the first one. At least 75% of health systems will develop guidelines through ethics committees or similar processes on how to allocate finite resources, including pharmaceuticals, when faced with an insurmountable surge in demand, such as caused by a disease pandemic. That, I think, is so much the topic of today. So talk to me a little bit about what did the survey sort of suggest would happen?
So, I wasn't surprised that people think that you need to have this. I think 100% of health systems need to have this, honestly, because, outside of a pandemic, we have drug shortages that limit the amount of drugs we have, and we do often have to ration care.
Right. And when that, so everyone agreed that we need this in place. Here's my question, though. What are the chances we're going to have a pandemic in the next 10 years?
Hard to know, but the effort needed isn't wasted. If you say this is only our pandemic policy, then yeah, that wastes it. But if you say this is what we do during a drug shortage, unfortunately, I don't think shortages are going away. And so this is useful to have no matter what situation comes your way.
Very cool. Very true. So what are some tips if when you're doing this at the University of Utah, what are some considerations you have as you're developing a policy around this? So it's not just pandemic specific, it'll be across the Yeah,
I think you want as much transparency as possible. So you need there to be kind of a standard process for exceptions for people to if they don't like the way that the criteria, if something's being rationed in a certain way, you want to offer them a pathway to talk about it, maybe offer a different case. I think you also want to talk about who's going to be involved. This is not a policy for pharmacy to do on their own. You want this to be the entire team with nursing and providers and others involved as well to make that decision. You never want to ration by yourself. So, making that transparent and that helps everyone understand when you have a limited commodity, how are we going to use it? And for, hopefully it's, to use it for the most good.
Which is a really interesting question. You talk about transparency, and I'm a strong proponent of transparency. The question I have is transparency to whom? Is it transparency to providers or is it to patients? In which case, how do you do the second?
So that's a great question. I think it depends on the product, right? If it's something that's only used in the OR during surgery, and those alternatives, maybe not as much of a need to let patients know. But if you're going to be switching someone's chemotherapy to a different product, you should probably give them the reason why, and just be transparent about that.
That's a hard conversation, right? The conversation is, look, we have 5 vials of this. We think it's the optimal treatment for you, but this person needs it more. So we're going to give you something that we don't have. Hopefully it's not substandard. It could be. It may not be the standard of care, if you will. But that's the best option we have for you today. Who has that conversation? Is it the physician? Is it the nurse? Is it the pharmacist?
Sometimes it's a team discussion. Luckily, we haven't had to have too many of those kind of conversations, but we have had to have conversations of, we need to change your appointment time so that you will come in at the same time as another patient so that we can split the vial for you and not waste any of your medicine. That's a little bit easier, but inconvenient in many cases for the patient to have to change things around. And
But that's a much better splitting of the pie, if you will.
Yes.
than the alternative.
We devote a lot of resources into looking ahead to see and trying not to start patients on therapy if we know that a product is short. That's and having that discussion.
If that happens, do you have a transparent conversation about that? Which is, look, you're newly diagnosed. We already have a drug shortage. We think this will be the right treatment for you, but considering the shortage, we might run out of the product for you. We're going to start you on a different product whose efficacy is either unknown or not as great. That sounds like a hard conversation again. It's just a different reframing.
Yeah, it's all a hard conversation. And then you have to weigh, is no treatment worse than treatment with something that we don't know if it's the same efficacy or not. It's really,
heartbreaking conversation.
Ideally, we wouldn't have these drug shortages and the supply chain would work, but that's not where we're at.
So it really raises the second question, which I've been far too involved in over the years, considering my own experience as a pharmacist, which is the exceptions. More often than not, it's surgery. More often than not, it's a attending who's bringing a lot of money to the hospital going, I want this drug for my patient. And you're going, it's a shortage. And they go, I don't care. I need this drug right now. How do you recommend when you're creating these processes that a conversation like that can be had? Because it's often the frontline pharmacist getting that phone call going, you have the drug. I know you have the drug. My patient doesn't fit in perfectly, but I still want this. So talk to me about how you're training your people to think through that question and have that conversation.
That's where having that process with the entire team, with senior leadership on that team, everyone agrees in advance before a shortage happens how it will be handled. And so, having the frontline pharmacist being able to go, okay, we can raise your concern with, chief of oncology or the chief medical officer, and they can go through that kind of peer-to-peer conversation of, we agreed to this, the medical board agreed to this process that we have in place. This is the why, and this is what's going to happen. And, I can't say that it works 100% of the time. There will always be those exceptions, or maybe you didn't think of a particular case when you were thinking of the criteria. But having a system in place before there's an emergency, before there's a need to ration, is really important, and get people to think about it while they're not emotional about the issue.
So at the health system level, is it fair to say that the goal is to create enough friction points, where usually the goal of healthcare is to avoid friction, but in these situations it's enough to create friction points to go, is this necessarily the right step for your patients? And the reason I ask that question is, in those scenarios, I can see myself having a conversation going, look, ideally I'd want to give this drug to you. You wouldn't even have to have this conversation with me. But the fact is that I don't have enough to give to everyone. So let's have a conversation. And then you're taking up time to have those conversations. Or is it fundamentally a problem when we as pharmacists create friction points? Do you see the ethical question? Yeah.
I don't, it's an interesting term, friction points, but I see what you mean. I think having that pause to think, and you might have an example of, look, the medical board has decided that we are going to reserve this product for patients with a possibility of a cure.
Yeah.
We know your patient is palliative, and so we think this other medicine might be, just as helpful. This is the why. And sometimes when you can explain the why behind those decisions, again, it's a pause. I guess it is a friction point. But that, I think that is the purpose.
Yeah. My experience has always been, it's this, your first year med students, your second year med students, going up to a little bit, almost up to the fellows, you can usually get that friction point to be helpful. Beyond that, it gets harder and harder. The fellows start pushing harder. And then though the attendings, interestingly enough, you get a nice mix of them, but it's just fascinating to me. Let's pick the next one you had, which was substantially greater federal resources will be made available to hospitals for surge planning to accommodate certain sudden increases in patient volume during pandemics and public health emergencies. So when I was looking at that one, it reminded me of some of the planning we did at our hospital, which is you'd have, what do you do in cases of terrorist attacks? What do you do in cases of pandemics? Really simple question for you. Do you feel like the planning we had before COVID-19 prepared us for COVID-19?
No. And in part, I think we didn't learn enough lessons from H1N1, right?
Right.
Did we ensure that we have enough PPE suppliers and production in the United States at that time? No, we didn't, because it went away, right? We just, sight unseen.
So what are the lessons we have learned, do you think? Do we keep drugs on the side just in case we have pandemics when we have these drug shortages all the time? What is the optimal way as a hospital? Or do we look at having a federal repository of drugs, and that's the way we have to handle this?
Yeah, I think it's complicated, and there's a variety of and I've thought a lot about it. There are a variety of ways to approach it, because stockpiling isn't always the answer, because it just expires and then people just see a bunch of wasted money there. You could think about, well, should we pay the wholesalers to just hold a larger amount on hand, and then they can keep turning over the stock, and then it won't expire. That costs money, though, so someone would have to subsidize that. There's certainly been very much a push towards onshoring, and let's make everything inside the United States. That has its own risk points as well. We think back to what are those shortages that we were so worried about during the hurricane in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is part of the United States, and yet very susceptible those manufacturing areas to hurricanes. So onshoring will take time and money and effort. And then I think also people don't always realize that we have drug factories in the United States already. And some of the shortages that we have are actually due to the quality problems at factories inside the United States. So just because something's made in the US doesn't mean that it is not susceptible to poor quality or shortages.
And we can take it one step further, which is even if, let's say, you did make it onshore, which would be great, what happens at this point? You're talking about a chronic increase in costs associated with that. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing or any of those things, but I think it decreases access to drugs for drugs that are already too expensive in many cases. Yeah. So onshoring is a great answer, but how do you deal with the ramifications thereof? So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, even with onshoring, you still need to plan for resiliency, right? Because no one area is safe all the time. There were manufacturers in Texas that lost power. It's, nothing is 100% safe. So I think it's building that resiliency and backup plans into whatever system we design.
I couldn't agree with you more. Let's take the next one. There will be at least one major technology infrastructure failure or breach, such as a global cybersecurity breach, ransomware event, and this will affect a wide segment of the U.S. healthcare delivery system. So that's a hard one because I deal a lot with cybersecurity and privacy issues, and we have talked about healthcare systems being penetrated by ransomware. So in these situations, what do you think the impact on drug delivery will be, and how does that sort of change how we prepare for it in the future, and how do pharmacists be prepared for it?
Yeah, that's a good question because you think about, well, what happens if all of our smart pump technology, all of our Omnicell technology, what if Epic gets shut down? That really impedes drug administration, right at that front line. But certainly you can have problems up the supply chain as well. If a factory has a problem, if a manufacturer has a problem, wholesalers, if you can't communicate with your wholesaler to place an order, there's so many places. It's almost like the medication use process, but there are so many places to break along the way.
But here's the question: is that a problem at the Erin Fox level, or is that a problem at the frontline pharmacist level? So you're thinking strategy, you're thinking across departments, you're thinking across hospitals, but is the frontline pharmacist, obviously they're affected, but can they do anything about it, or do they just have to deal with it and roll with the punches?
Well, frontline pharmacists, we may have some working from home. You got to work on a secure account. They need to do all of those, duo, all the security measures. So if they're trying to skirt that, then there can be weak points there. So even frontline pharmacists can have a role in ensuring security.
Fascinating. Yeah. As telehealth becomes more and more pervasive, as we have pharmacists working more and more from home, that becomes a much bigger issue. I was actually, I got out of pharmacy working on the front lines last year, so I didn't have to deal with that. And totally missed that part of it. Fascinating. Thank you. Okay, here's another one. The FDA will rate the effectiveness of quality management systems of drug manufacturers, which will allow health systems to assess the supply of the risk of supply disruptions caused by serious breaches in quality. Now, that raises two questions to me. The first question I'm thinking of is the idea of, how do we get greater visibility through transparency? And how do you get better trust in the data itself? So one solution that I've seen proposed is the idea of using blockchain-like systems. So distributed ledger technology or blockchain-like systems. Obviously, we aren't there yet. We're pretty far away from that, though people are talking about it. People have different processes in place. What have you seen that is getting us closer to that answer? The closest I've seen is the FDA sort of giving you a list, but that's often after the fact. So what do you recommend? What have you seen?
So, FDA recommended that this could be a potential solution for shortages in their own report. I've seen ISPE working on some models for companies to get ready for this. I've also talked to folks that work for FDA's Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, and over many, many years, they have talked about how they see very real quality differences between manufacturers and products. but those aren't communicated to people who are purchasing product. It's a pass-fail system.
Yeah.
And so I would dearly love to see that rating system, even though it might not be perfect. It just seems like medications are the only thing that we buy almost without any star ratings. I mean, you can, it's like shopping on Amazon without any, seller ratings or, without name brands, anything. It's a very frustrating process to have basically the only thing to worry about is price.
That's a really interesting analogy, though. The analogy of shopping on Amazon. The truth is that Amazon struggles with false ratings and struggles with fake products. So do you think a Amazon-like wholesale system that basically bypasses wholesalers, giving you direct access to the manufacturers and seeing their rating systems, is what the future of pharmacy should hold?
That's a good question. I mean, on the other hand, like, you could also argue, well, what good is a rating system if there's only one supplier of a medicine?
Yeah.
What do you do?
I can think of one answer, Civicrx.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear more about what the role of a company like that is in sort of the future of, I don't know if I can trust the drug. Let's ask a basic question. Why should I trust Civicrx?
So I will say that Civica is providing a lot more transparency than other companies. They will tell you exactly which company made the product, where it's made, as well as the country of origin of the API. So we don't have that with other medications.
So let's say you did. Would that change how you buy products?
That's a good question. You need to be able to connect the dots, right? Sometimes that a contract manufacturer has such a horrific track record with 483s and warning letters. You don't want to buy anything made in that factory, but the current system right now doesn't allow us to do that. So a rating scale would be easier for purchasers who aren't willing to nerd out and spend the time on wading through FDA's website.
It's interesting you say that, because when I think about my own purchasing history of pharmaceuticals when I worked in different hospitals, you really start with, where can I find the cheapest drug? You don't see that star rating system. And I guess theoretically, if I had 3 stars versus 4 stars as the same exact cost, maybe I'd go with the 4-star. But if that's not available, does it really dramatically change? Change what product I'd sort of buy? I guess I'm asking you at the frontline level, do you think that would make a difference?
Without a stick for the hospitals to kind of force them to buy the higher quality product, it wouldn't work. It just wouldn't.
So what would that stick look like?
I mean, it'd be hugely unpopular, but what if CMS only reimbursed you for a certain star rating level?
Ooh.
Kind of harsh, right? Everyone hates that plan.
I kind of like it. It's a very, what happens if you're the only manufacturer?
Yeah.
And you're low quality on that, or low star rating on that.
Yeah, that's really tough, because then people don't get reimbursed, and then they're mad, or you find an alternative, or hopefully it improves quality pretty quickly. But it's kind of like the nuclear bomb option, right? Like, I think everyone would hate that.
But I think the people who would hate that the most is the pharmaceutical company.
Sure.
Because now they have a really low star system that affects all their products.
Yep.
And there's nothing you can do to influence that. Because you need this very objective method of creating a star system to what's effectively a very subjective process. Interesting question to ponder. Your next one is, global issues such as trade restrictions, terrorism, military activity, pandemics, and climate change will increase the potential for significant drug shortages compared to 2020. Pandemics to me definitely stands out. What I think is interesting is, first of all, you put in climate change. When I say you, I mean whoever actually helped write that survey, but they put in climate change. Obviously, climate change is super hot right now, but what did you have in mind or whoever put that in have in mind when they put in climate change, you think? say
We were
2020.
thinking about disruptions due to weather, whether that's like a hurricane, too cold of weather, prohibiting shipping, that type of thing.
Okay. So do you think that we're entering a version where that's going to become a important enough factor to consider as we're getting into global distribution chains, right? But technically we're in the middle of global distribution chains, but as we start looking at inshoring or something else?
I hope so, because if you're working, even if you're thinking about onshoring, to have that resiliency, you better plan for some pretty severe weather in places, and figure out how you're still going to deliver on top of that severe weather.
So let's raise the second question. You then talk about terrorism. It seems like almost quaint. It was only 20 years ago. It's literally 20. Yeah, right? 9/11. So do we see, I don't see too many drugs being made in terror hotspots. But is that, maybe I'm not thinking about it that way. What do you think? What are some situations where you see terror being a real issue?
When we were kind of thinking of this, we were a little bit kind of throwing random ideas out, but gosh, people might want to hijack some vaccine coming out of a plant.
That's really good. A really good example of that, now that you mention it, is there's been an argument that either Russia or China broke into the EMA system and found out what the recipe, if you will, for the product is. So yeah, if you can create the recipe, you can just as easily destroy the recipe, or just as easily change the recipe a little bit. Yeah. And if you do that, not only does your country have the drug, someone else's country doesn't.
Right. And maybe it's not necessarily terrorism, but certainly nationalism, right? We've seen really recent stories where countries aren't going to ship vaccine to other countries. They're just going to hold it. So,
yeah. These are some fascinating conversations. Let's take another one. The federal government will adopt rules under which prescription drugs may be imported from other countries. That's the last rule, the last observations you had. I think that's a fascinating one, because we now have the ability to do that theoretically, but it's not gotten very far, and it's been less popular than people expected. Though technically, and this is not a political statement. This is more a question of President Trump was popular because of doing this, but question is, does it have any practical implication? And what is your take on that? Do you see?
No, this is the dumbest idea to fix shortages, right?
Why?
Because there is no way that pharma is going to sell more drug to Canada so that we can buy it at a lower cost. Like it just doesn't work that way. It's
well, actually, they say that pharma said, according to the president, the former president, pharma was open to it, but there were too many hurdles in the way to make that happen. I don't understand the logic behind it, but apparently that's a argument out there.
Yeah, it really doesn't make sense because pharma sells certain amounts of product. They're not going to sell, all of Canada is basically the size of California, so it's like asking California to share all of their drugs with the entire United States. Canada has really bad shortages as well. So it's not like they are, rolling around in a great wealth of surplus. So yeah. It just doesn't work like that. And I don't think it's maybe for a one-off, one patient here and there, it might make a difference. But as a general solution, to me, it's not realistic.
So, but is that a methodology? I haven't dealt enough with Health Canada in the context of drug approvals to be able to comment intelligently about this. But does it open up the methodology of saying, you know what, Health Canada may have slightly lower standards than, say, the US FDA? I'm not sure if that's true at all, but let's assume it is for a second. But if that was true, companies could say, I want to go to Health Canada, get my product approved there, and knowing fully well that it'll end up getting sold in the US. And that's really what your end game is. Do you foresee a methodology where companies start gaming that process? Or do you think that it's just a it's just for political points, if you will?
I think it's interesting where you talk about the different approval agencies, because I know that certainly FDA would like to harmonize, and in some cases they do accept inspections from other regulators. Folks have talked about that as being a little bit of a solution to help streamline supply lines. One company won't be waiting for 4 different regulators to come in and inspect them. They can just have one. But I also think that just that solution is unrealistic and for political points.
Fair enough. So let's talk a little bit. We talked about solutions, problems that might be happening. Let's talk a little bit about solutions that are happening. And when we talk about that, a really good place to jump off is a place we very briefly discussed a few seconds ago, which was Civicrx. We're already well past the time that I really hoped the conversation would go. But let me just poke at it, and we can have a different discussion in the future. Could you talk a little bit about the concept of Civicrx, where did it come from, how did you get involved, and what problem does it solve?
So I became involved with Civica because I have a lot of historical shortage data. Their founder came to me with this idea. I gave him all of our historical data and said, "You're crazy. You can't do this." But the problem that it's trying to solve is something that manufacturers have said is the problem that needs fixing. And manufacturers say that in order to make these low-cost generic injectable drugs, they need a guaranteed volume with a long-term contract, and that's the subscription method that Civica uses attempts to fix that. And so it's a really exciting model. It's not something we have anywhere else in pharmacy purchasing. And so we're still in that experimental stage to see if it works or not.
Could you talk a little bit about the subscription model? What do you mean by that?
So as Civica announces the products that they're going to have, hospitals decide yes or no. I would like, let's just use the example of vancomycin. That was one of their first products. You estimate how much you intend to buy over a 5-year period. It's really hard to do that, actually. Yeah. And they don't want to supply 100% of your product either, but you give them an estimate, you commit to that, and then if you choose not to buy that product, you still have to pay Civica. So, hospitals have skin in the game as well.
So in those situations, are you bypassing the wholesaler and the middleman, if you will, or are you basically saying that you're still going to use the same methodology, you're just guaranteeing something for the manufacturer?
Yeah, we're just guaranteeing it. It's the Civica is small as they've been starting up, so they don't use all 3 of the big wholesalers, but it just goes through one. And yeah, you're just you're not saying you're going to get 100% of your drug through Civica, but you're hedging your bet, and you know that you will at least have this much on hand.
But let's say there's a shortage, say in China, where you're getting the API from. Wouldn't Civica be just as hit as any other manufacturer?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the risk, right? Because Civica, they don't have their own end-to-end supply chain. And so they are susceptible to other supply chain issues that could occur.
So again, so let's go back to the question. The question was, what problem does Civica solve? For me, it's exciting because they're coming at it from a nonprofit perspective. But the problem is not, we'll give you a product when no one else can. The problem is not, I will give you a cheap product. So what is the problem that Civica is solving?
The problem Civica is solving is we will give you a consistent supply of a medication you're going to need. And you can not worry about that product and focus on other issues.
But how would they do that if we just said that they'd be hit by the same supply chain issues?
So, Civica works hard to minimize those. They vet their CMOs very carefully. They try to source API only from the EU or the US. And so they try. They try to minimize that. They also have a safety stock on hand as well to try to buffer a supply issue.
So what happens if they're seeing something go wrong? Do they sort of pivot and say, we'll find it from somewhere else? I.e., let me reframe the question a better way. the hospitals have to guarantee that they will buy a certain amount, and that's the problem that that Civica is solving, which is we'll give you the certain amount. What if Civica is unable to give the certain amount?
Then your commitment is prorated and adjusted down.
Oh, okay. So it's prorated. So Civica isn't, on the other hand, guaranteeing the supply either. So interesting model. I love it though. How do you sort of connect that to what I'm blanking on the billionaire's name? I spent the last 3 minutes trying to think of his name. The guy in Texas owns the
Mark Cuban.
Yeah, Mark Cuban. Thank you. So Mark Cuban is doing his own version of this.
Sure.
And he had a very, very ambitious number. He said something like 100 ANDAs by the end of the year. And I was like, I don't know how you do that. I've worked with a lot of pharma companies. I don't know a single one that can pull that off. Not even a Pfizer or not even a Greenstone or whoever it is. Sure. But let's assume he even gets to 10% of that, and he has 10 new ANDAs. Do you think what problem, based on what you can tell? And again, I reckon, just to be clear, there's no legal advice, there's no clinical advice being given right now. We're just sort of postulating this. What do you think is the problem he's trying to solve? Is it cost?
I think it's cost and accessibility as well. Civica isn't perfect. They don't have all drugs. And so I think for this type of solution to work, we're going to need multiple companies to kind of maybe do the subscription model, kind of step in to try to improve the supply chain. Because what we have is broken. It's not working.
So it's really almost anything's better than nothing is where we are right now. Like what we have doesn't work. So we need a network of Mark Cuban companies, Civicas, and whoever else, maybe it's Amazon's in the future, coming together and saying, look, whatever's there is great. We're happy to work with you, but you don't solve our problems. We have hundreds of drugs and shortages at any given time. So we need these hedges. And that's the problem that a Mark Cuban is coming in to solve, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I think we've had a good 10 years of really severe shortages.
Yeah.
Companies have had time to try to fix it if they wanted to. They just haven't.
Yeah, what's the impetus to do it?
None.
You're stuck with me anyways. I'm the only manufacturer. So no, I love it. We could obviously keep going for hours and hours more, but Erin, you are incredible and a wonderful source of information. So thank you. I hope you're open to doing, say, 5 rapid fire questions.
Sure.
Okay. It's a new segment we've introduced. We'll sort of ask them and we'll kind of go from there. What is an accomplishment you're most proud of?
Being a mother.
Very cool. When are you most inspired?
Working with my team and coming to solutions for our organization.
I'm going to press you a little bit further. Who is your team? Because you're in so many teams. What team are you talking about?
Working with the folks that I work with every single day on drug shortages, and the way that we work together to find a solution to make sure that the impact on our patients is mitigated. Every day I'm inspired by these people.
That's awesome. What's the best compliment you've ever received?
That someone when people tell me that they look up to me and that I am a role model for them, that's amazing to hear.
I'm surprised that you literally should be getting that every day. Like, I know so many people who are just enamored by just the stuff you do and the fascinating things you get into. And count me one of those, to be fair. Who is your hero or heroine and why?
I would say Val Jensen, who works for FDA's drug shortage team. I've known her for over 20 years and just amazing invisible work done for the American people every day. So
cool. I'm thinking it's cool mostly because I don't get the FDA thrown in there as people you look up to often enough, and I think they do an incredible job. So kudos. What is your favorite way to give back to your community?
That's a good question. We love to donate time and money through our food bank. It's fun to do food drives. We do that with our colleagues here at work as well. So yeah, that's fun.
And how do you define success?
I define success mainly, can I sleep at night? Honestly,
I love it. Okay.
have we come to a good place where I can sleep at night?
And I'm going to tell you, your best job in the world can be professional hobo. You can sleep at night. What challenges you?
Drug shortages, knowing that we don't have the medicines that we might need for our patients. I think about it every day.
Where was the best vacation you've ever taken?
Favorite place is Grand Teton National Park. We try to go there every year. Love it.
Are you a hiker or you just like the view?
Hike, canoe, paddleboard. My grandfather was a forest ranger there, and so there's a little bit of family history.
So cool. Okay. What is the most fun you've had recently?
This podcast? No. This has been a year with not a lot of fun, but I will say that the most fun and the best thing that happened is my parents got vaccinated, and I've been vaccinated. So a couple weeks ago, I actually got to give my parents a hug, and that was the most fun that I've had all year.
I love it. That's awesome. Last question. If you were a superhero, what would your powers be?
Ooh. Transparency.
That's cheating, but I love the answer.
Anything I want, transparent.
Perfect. Erin, this was wonderful. Thank you so much for being on. I do want to point out that, hold on. Let's do a quick recap of where we were. We talked a little bit about contract manufacturers. We talked about the different findings you had as part of the ASHP survey, the surveys that you did itself. We talked about the findings themselves. We talked about what the reasons were. We talked about your experience with Civicrx, and we talked about things like transparency and the exceptions associated with them. Did I miss anything, first of all?
No, I think it's a good rundown.
Okay. As a guest, based on our discussion, what is one question you'd like the audience to answer for us in the comments?
Would you pay more for a higher quality product?
Ooh, I like that question. Would you pay more for a higher quality product? Okay, so hopefully answer that for Erin. We'd love to tell her what you guys came back with. Nothing in this podcast should be construed as legal or clinical advice of any kind. It is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. It does not necessarily represent the opinions of any of the participants. For those of you who missed it, Erin, where can you be reached?
I am on Twitter a lot at FoxErinR, and hit me up there.
And if you like this podcast, please leave a comment and subscribe. You can find me on Twitter at Darshan Talks or on our website at darshantalks.com. And thank you so much, Erin. We'd love to have you back again.
It's fun. Thanks.